Video gaming is a multi-billion-dollar industry bringing in more money than movies and DVDs. Video games have been available to consumers for the last 30 years. They are a unique form of entertainment, and they encourage players to become part of the actual game. Today's video games have become very sophisticated and realistic. Some games even connect to the internet where kids can play with other people from around the world. About 90% of U.S. kids ages 8 to 16 play video games, and they spend about 13 hours a week doing so, or even more. Now, numerous studies suggest that virtual violence in these games may make kids more aggressive in real life. Playing everyday video games emphasizes negative themes and affects children's minds. While some games have educational content, many of the most popular games that kids choose to play are video games that promote the killing of people or animals, the use of abusive drugs and alcohol, criminal behavior, disrespect for authority and the law, sexual exploitation, violence and toward women, racial, sexual and gender stereotypes, foul language, and obscene gestures. The graphics on these new video games look so real that it seems like even when you shoot a person, like you can actually feel the blood. These kids start playing at a very young age. Most begin at the age of 7, and they can play around for 13 hours a week, and boys can even play around. Video games don't teach kids moral consequences. If you shoot someone in one of these games, you don't go to jail. You don't get penalized in some way. You just get extra points. This doesn't mean that children will go out into the world and shoot someone, but according to the American Psychological Association, they do use more aggressive language, they do use more aggressive images, and they have less ability to control their anger and externalize things in these violence. The American Psychological Association says that playing violent games correlates to children being less caring and helpful toward their own peers. Children spend a great deal of time with violent games at exactly the ages that they should be actually learning healthy ways to relate to other people and resolve conflicts in a peaceful manner. Violence in video games gives the message to children that it is acceptable to treat one another rudely and even aggressively. Dr. David Walsh, a president of the National Institute of Media and the Family, argues that it doesn't necessarily mean that because a kid plays a violent game, they're immediately going to go out and beat someone up. The real impact is in shaping the norms and shaping their attitude. As those gradually shift, the difference starts to show up in their own behavior. Spending more than 5 hours a day playing these aggressive video games can affect children's social skills. Children become obsessed with playing video games that then leads to poor social skills. It prevents children to socialize and interact with other kids their age. Video games take time away from family bonding, school, and other hobbies. My little brother, for example, goes straight to his room after he comes from school and just locks himself up and plays video games. Even when my mom says, like, oh, you need to do your homework first and then go and play video games, he'll like rush to finish his homework and go straight to playing video games, which makes you think maybe they're not even focusing on, doing their homework. Playing video games also affects children's grades because they are reading less and rushing to finish homework, like I said. Video games create aggressive thoughts and behaviors. Video games gives the message to children that the world is a hostile place. Dr. L. Rollo Huseman, director of the Research Center for Group Dynamics at the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research, has been studying violence in media and behavior for more than 30 years, and he explains how children think acting aggressively is an okay way to deal with it. He also says how kids can become adjusted to violence. Because when you're exposed to violence day in and day out, it loses its emotional impact on you, and you're just emotionally numb to violence. It's much easier to engage in violence. Video games can also increase children's aggression and they can become future bullies. When kids have anxiety, instead of soothing themselves, calming themselves, talking about it, expressing it to someone, or even expressing it emotionally by crying, they just tend to externalize it. They can attack something, they can kick a wall, they can yell at a pet. In the study of Dr. Craig A. Anderson of Iowa State, and him and his colleagues, they looked at how children and teens' video game habits at one time point related to their behavior 3 to 6 months later. The study included 3 groups of kids, 181 Japanese students ages from 12 to 15, 1,050 Japanese students aging 13 to 18, and 364 U.S. kids ages from 9 to 12. And in every group, they were exposed to more video game violence that become more aggressive over time than their peers who had the less exposure or who did not have exposure at all. Playing video games may increase aggressive behavior because violent acts are continually repeated throughout the video game. This method of repetition has long been considered an effective teaching method in reinforcing learning patterns according to the Congressional Public Health Center. If you're actively involved in learning, you remember things better. Private practice psychologist Lisbeth and a past president of the APS Media Division says, so in a game you do things over and over, whereas in the movies or television you just watch it once. And in the game, there is reinforcement for it. So if it is killing people that you're doing, you just get a reward for that. Playing too much video game increases in aggressive behavior. In one study by Walsh that he did, where a majority of teens admitted that their parents do not impose a time limit on the number of hours they are allowed to play video games. The study also showed that most parents aren't aware of the content of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, the ESRB rating of the video game, which is basically a self-regulatory body established that rates the form of the game, just like movies. Based on its developed guidelines, the ESRB then gives an age recommendation and content. And another study by Gentile said that girls play video games for an average of 5 hours a week, while boys more than 13 hours a week. So basically, if you get a lot of exposure with playing video games, they can lead to aggressive behavior.
All right, Lisbeth, I thought that the topic area is very clear, but your claim is not as specific as it should be. Sort of back into it with all of the early statements that you make about the subject, and I think a much more explicit statement of your proposition is necessary. The same thing is true for the contents of the speech. I think you need a much stronger organization and preview of what the main points are going to be. In fact, it sounded a little confusing because you went from aggression to distraction and back to aggression, and then there were more claims about aggression. So a lot of claims about aggression, they need to be distinguished a little bit more by having distinct secondary claims. And then I think that your other issue needs to either be taken out of the speech, or you need to have a separate claim on that and put it in either at the beginning and make it a distinct argument there, or at the end, here's an additional problem, but buried in the middle, it seems a little confusing. On your evidence, you present a lot of factual information early on, and I think that you do a pretty good job of that, although I do think you want to provide us some source citations on that. The best set of evidence that you have is you have a lot of expert authority, people who have researched and studied these things. You're consistent about citing those authorities and quoting them, so I think you do a very good job on that. There's not a lot of statistical information. There's one place where you cite some rates about how frequently the boys versus the girls play on these games. None of the studies that you cite told us how much more violent, how much more aggressive, how much time anybody wastes. The only examples that you had were the personal examples, and they were okay. Like I said, most of the time your evidence was most heavily in the area of the expert testimony, and you always gave the source citations on that. So I thought you had good support for the aggression issue. It needed to be organized a little bit better. A lot of reading, and I know part of that is because you have a lot of quoted material, but you also need to, like I say, structure those secondary claims more and then talk to us about those claims, and I think you'd be better off. All right, thank you.